Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Vincent Coldwater, and I've been a ranger at Glacier Bay National Park for 18 years. Before that, I spent 6 years in the Coast Guard, doing search and rescue in these same freezing waters. I know every inlet, every ice shelf, every seal breeding ground in this corner of Alaska. I've pulled drowning fishermen from the water, rescued tourists trapped by incoming tides, and tracked poachers through blizzards that would make most people curl up and die. I'm telling you this so you understand I'm not some rookie who panics at shadows. I'm 44 years old, half Tlingit on my mother's side, and I've spent my entire adult life in these waters. I know what's real and what's not, or at least, I thought I did. It was February 1984 when everything I believed got turned inside out. The sun barely made it above the horizon anymore. We were getting maybe 6 hours of weak daylight between 18 hours of darkness. The temperature had been sitting at 20 below for a week straight, and pack ice was forming fast across Muir Inlet, 60 miles from the nearest town. I was stationed at the remote cabin near the inlet's mouth, the one we use for winter marine patrols. My ex-wife had the boys for the month, so I'd volunteered for the isolation duty. Most rangers hate the winter post's no radio contact except for the scheduled check-ins, nearest help 8 hours away by snowmobile if the weather holds. But I liked the quiet, gave me time to think. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Kushtaka when I was a kid. Shape-shifting otter spirits, she called them. Creatures that looked human until they dove into the water, then turned into giant otters. According to the old tales, they guarded the traditional hunting grounds and punished anyone who showed disrespect to the sea and its animals. I'd smile and nod, but I never believed her. I figured the stories were just the old way of explaining drowning accidents. Someone goes out alone, the current takes them, and the family needs something to blame besides bad luck or carelessness. That changed on February 14th. The call came through on my morning radio check. 3 Inuit seal hunters hadn't returned to their camp. They'd gone out 2 days before on the ice shelf, near the old whaling station ruins, a spot where seals liked to haul out. Their families had waited the first night without worrying. Weather delays happen, but when the second night passed with no sign of them, they'd snowmobiled to Gustavus and reported them missing. "Vincent, you're closest," the dispatcher said. Her voice crackled through the static. "Can you check the usual spots?" "Yeah, I'll head out within the hour," I said. "Who are we looking for?" Enu Kapianak, age 62, Joseph Tugiak, 28, and Mary Sivlik, 26. I wrote the names down. Mary Sivlik? Is that Chief Sivulik's daughter? Granddaughter, first woman in the family to hunt seals. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The traditional hunters knew these waters better than anyone. If they were in trouble, it wasn't because they'd made rookie mistakes. I loaded my Zodiac boat with emergency supplies, throw bags, ice picks, hypothermia gear, flares. The 90-horsepower Evinrude outboard started on the second pull, and I headed out into the inlet. The water was black and still, with chunks of ice floating past like pieces of a broken mirror. The temperature was dropping fast, and my breath made white clouds in front of my face. The ice shelf where the hunters had set up was about 12 miles north, near the ruins of the old whaling station. Back in 1923, something had happened there, a massacre, according to the old records. 15 whalers killed in a single night. The official report blamed native uprising, but the Tlingit elders told a different story. They said the whalers had killed a seal that was pregnant with twins, and the Kushtaka had come for revenge. I'd always dismissed it as legend. I should have listened to my grandmother. The first thing I noticed when I reached the ice shelf was the silence. I've spent 18 years in the Alaskan wilderness, and I know what quiet sounds like, but this was different. This was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your heart pound. No seals barking, no birds calling, just the soft lap of water against ice and the distant crack of a glacier calving somewhere in the darkness. I cut the engine and let the Zodiac drift toward the shelf. The seal hunters' camp was there, 2 tents still standing. A fire pit with cold ashes, equipment scattered around. But no people. I tied off the boat and climbed onto the ice, my boots crunching on the frozen surface. The camp looked abandoned in a hurry. Coffee pot still sitting on the fire ring. A pair of gloves frozen stiff on the ice. One tent had its flap open, wind blowing snow inside. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Service, anyone here?" Nothing. I checked both tents. Sleeping bags, personal items, food supplies, all still there. These hunters hadn't packed up and left. Something had interrupted them. That's when I saw the tracks. They started at the edge of the camp and led toward the water. At first, I thought they were otter prints, 5-toed, with visible claw marks, but they were huge, maybe 10 inches long. Way too big for any otter I'd ever seen. I knelt down to examine them closer. The tracks were fresh, probably made within the last 12 hours. I followed them with my eyes, and that's when my stomach dropped. Halfway to the water's edge, the tracks changed. They went from otter prints to human footprints. Not beside them, not overlapping. The exact same track line, just transformed. One print would be an otter, the next would be a bare human foot, then back to otter, then human again. I stood up slowly, my hand moving to the radio on my belt. But I was too far out for radio contact. I was on my own. I followed the tracks to the water's edge. They disappeared into a hole in the ice, a rough opening about 6 feet across, the edges jagged like something had smashed through from below. The water in the hole was completely still, black and deep. I leaned forward, trying to see down into it, and that's when I smelled something wrong. A fishy smell, thick and rotten, even in the sub-zero air. Something moved in the water. I jerked back, my hand going to the .44 revolver on my hip. But whatever I'd seen was gone. Just a shadow, maybe, a trick of the light. I circled around the camp, looking for more clues. That's when I found the first kayak. It was pulled up on the ice about 100 yards from camp, turned on its side. The fiberglass hull was shredded, deep gouges running from bow to stern. I knelt down and examined the marks. They looked like claw marks, but they were spaced too wide. Whatever made them had hands, bigger than mine, much bigger. I checked my watch. 2 hours of weak daylight left, then 18 hours of darkness. I needed to search the area before I lost the light completely. I found the second kayak 20 minutes later. It was upside down, frozen into the ice at the water's edge. A trail of dark brown stains led from it to another hole in the ice. The stains were frozen solid, but I knew what they were: blood. I took photos with my Kodak, documented everything in my notebook. All the while, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. My training said to continue the search, check every possible location. But something else, something older and deeper, was screaming at me to get back in the boat and leave. I was about to head back to the Zodiac when I heard it, a voice, calling from somewhere across the ice. "Vincent? Vincent, help me." I froze. The voice was thin and distant, but I recognized it. Jake Stormwind, another ranger, stationed 50 miles south at Bartlett Cove. We'd worked together for years. He was my closest friend in the Park Service. "Jake," I shouted, "where are you?" "I'm hurt. I'm by the old whaling station. Please, Vincent, I can't move." I grabbed my gear and started running across the ice toward the ruins. The old whaling station was just a quarter-mile away, a few collapsed buildings and rusted equipment, all reclaimed by snow and ice. I ran hard, my breath burning in my lungs, my boots slipping on the frozen surface. The voice kept calling, getting weaker. "Vincent, please, it hurts." I rounded a pressure ridge and saw the ruins ahead, dark shapes against the white ice. No sign of Jake. "Jake, keep talking, I'm coming." The voice called again, but this time it was behind me. I spun around. Nothing but empty ice and darkness. "Vincent, help me." The voice was coming from the water now, from one of the holes in the ice. I backed away slowly, my hand on my gun. My heart was slamming against my ribs. That wasn't Jake. Jake was 50 miles away at Bartlett Cove. Whatever was calling to me was using his voice. I didn't sleep that night. I'd made it back to the Zodiac and gotten the hell off that ice shelf. The engine screamed as I pushed it to full throttle, driving through chunks of ice that banged against the hull. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that place. Back at the cabin, I tried the radio. Static. The scheduled check-in wasn't for another 8 hours, and the weather was blocking all other frequencies. I was completely isolated. I locked every door and window, loaded my revolver and set it on the table beside me, made coffee and drank it until my hands stopped shaking. But I couldn't stop thinking about those tracks, the way they changed from otter to human, the voice calling to me in Jake's voice, the smell of rot in the freezing air. My grandmother's stories kept coming back to me. The Kushtaka, shapeshifters, guardians of the hunting grounds. No, I was a rational man, a trained professional. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the tracks were separate prints that just looked like they connected. Maybe I'd heard an echo, my own voice bouncing off the ice. Maybe the stress and cold were making me see things. I almost believed it. Then, just before dawn, I heard scratching at the door, soft at first, like fingernails on wood, then harder, claws on metal. I grabbed my gun and stood up, my chair scraping back across the floor. "Who's there?" The scratching stopped. Then I heard breathing. Right outside the door, heavy and wet, like something that had just climbed out of the water. "Vincent." The voice was my ex-wife's. "Vincent, please let me in. I'm so cold. The boys are with me, they're freezing." My finger tightened on the trigger. "Lisa's in Anchorage with the boys. Please, Vincent. We need you." Now it was my son's voice. Michael, 7 years old. "Daddy, why won't you open the door? We're scared." I wanted to scream. Instead, I pressed my back against the far wall and kept the gun pointed at the door. "You're not my son." The breathing stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then something hit the door so hard the whole cabin shook. Once, twice, 3 times, the wood cracked but held. I fired a shot through the door. The gunshot was deafening in the small cabin. Whatever was outside made a sound I'll never forget. Not quite human, not quite animal. A shrieking, hissing noise that raised every hair on my body. Then, silence. I stood there for an hour, gun raised, waiting. But nothing else happened. Eventually, as weak dawnlight started to filter through the windows, I crept forward and opened the door. The snow outside was disturbed, deep gouges in the ice, like something with claws had been digging. And leading away from the cabin, disappearing toward the water, were those same tracks. Otter. Human. Otter. Human. The morning radio check came at 8. I reported everything: the missing hunters, the strange tracks, the voice mimicking people I knew. The dispatcher sounded concerned but cautious. "Vincent, when's the last time you slept?" "I'm not hallucinating." "I didn't say you were. But you've been out there alone for 2 weeks. The isolation can. Send someone out here. Send Jake. Send anyone. But send them armed." There was a long pause. "Weather's getting worse. The helicopter can't fly until tomorrow at the earliest. Can you make it until then?" I looked out at the inlet. Gray water, white ice, something moving in the distance too far to see clearly. "Yeah," I said, "I'll make it." I lied. That afternoon, I went back out. I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't just sit in the cabin and wait. 3 people were missing, maybe still alive, maybe needing help. I took the Zodiac back to the ice shelf, moving slowly, watching the water. The pack ice had thickened overnight. Soon the inlet would be completely frozen, and boat travel would be impossible. I found the 3rd kayak near the whaling station ruins. This one wasn't empty. Mary Savulik was inside, curled into a ball, her eyes wide open but not seeing anything. She was alive but barely body temperature, so low she shouldn't have been breathing. Her lips were blue, her skin gray. I wrapped her in emergency blankets and got her into the Zodiac. She didn't respond to my voice or my touch, just stared straight ahead, her mouth moving silently. I leaned close to hear what she was saying. "Otter men," she whispered. "Otter men with human eyes." I got the engine started and headed back to the cabin. Mary stayed in that catatonic state the whole way, just repeating those words over and over. Otter men with human eyes. I was halfway back when I saw them. 6 shapes, moving across the ice shelf. At first, I thought they were seals, dark bodies against the white surface. But seals don't move like that, don't stand upright on 2 legs. I cut the engine and grabbed my binoculars. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped them. They were tall, 8 feet, maybe more. Bodies covered in dark brown fur. Arms too long, ending in webbed hands with claws. They moved with a strange, fluid motion, almost flowing across the ice. But their faces, God, their faces were human, sort of, human eyes, human mouths. But when one of them opened its mouth, I saw rows of sharp teeth. And when it turned its head, I saw gill slits behind its ears, opening and closing. The largest one, 9 feet tall with a scarred face, looked directly at me. Even across the distance, I felt its eyes lock onto mine. Then they dove into the water, all 6 of them, sliding into holes in the ice like otters. I started the engine and pushed it to full throttle, not caring about the ice chunks anymore, just desperate to get away. Mary started screaming a high, thin sound that didn't stop until we reached the cabin. Jake arrived by helicopter the next morning. He brought thermal imaging equipment and 2 other rangers. They all looked at me with concern when I told them what I'd seen. I could see it in their eyes. They thought the isolation had gotten to me. "Vincent, buddy, you look terrible," Jake said. "When's the last time you slept?" "I found Mary Savulik," I said, pointing to the cabin. "She's inside. She's alive, but she won't talk. And I saw them, Jake. The Kushtaka. Just like my grandmother's stories." Jake glanced at the other rangers. "Let's get Mary to a hospital first. Then we'll search the area together, okay?" But the helicopter couldn't take off. The weather had turned bad, wind, gusting at 40 knots, visibility down to nothing. We were trapped until the storm passed. That night, they came for us. We were inside the cabin, trying to keep Mary warm, when the thermal equipment started going crazy. Jake had set up monitors showing the area around the cabin, and suddenly they were lighting up with heat signatures, 6 of them, circling the building. "What the hell?" Jake moved to the window. "Vincent, are there polar bears this far south?" "Those aren't bears." He looked at me. "Then what are they?" Before I could answer, something hit the side of the cabin. Then another impact, and another. They were trying to get in. I grabbed my gun. Jake grabbed his. The other 2 rangers, Sarah and Tom, took positions at the windows. "We need to get to the helicopter," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking. "If we can make it to the helicopter." The thermal monitor showed one of them on the roof. Then the monitor went dark. "They're cutting the power," I said. "Get Mary. We're leaving now." We got Mary to her feet and headed for the door. Jake went first, gun raised, thermal scope mounted on his rifle. I came last, making sure everyone was ahead of me. The helicopter was 50 yards away, might as well have been 50 miles. They came out of the darkness. I'd seen them from a distance, but up close they were worse, so much worse. 8 feet of muscle and fur and teeth. Their eyes reflected our flashlights, yellow and cold. When they moved, they were fast. Impossibly fast. The first one took Tom, just grabbed him and dragged him across the ice before any of us could react. His screams cut off suddenly. Sarah fired her rifle. I don't know if she hit anything. The creatures moved like liquid, flowing around our bullets. "The water," I shouted. "Don't let them get you to the water." We ran for the helicopter. Jake was in front, half carrying Mary. I was firing behind us, but the creatures just kept coming. They weren't trying to kill us quickly. They were herding us, driving us toward the ice. I realized too late what they were doing. We were running across a section of thin ice. The pack ice hadn't frozen solid here yet. Under our feet, the surface started to crack. "Stop!" I screamed. "Everyone, stop!" But it was too late. The ice gave way under Jake. He dropped Mary and grabbed for the edge, but the largest Kushtaka, the one with the scarred face, was already there. It looked at me with those human eyes, and I swear to God it smiled. Then it grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him under. The water closed over him. I scrambled to the edge, reached down, but there was nothing. Just black water and broken ice. "Jake," Sarah pulled me back. "We have to go. We have to." She didn't finish. Something grabbed her leg from below. She screamed and fired her rifle into the water, but it didn't matter. She was pulled under, just like Jake. I was alone with Mary, on a floating piece of ice, surrounded by black water and darkness. The creatures were in the water. Now I could see shapes moving below the surface. They could swim so fast, faster than anything natural. The scarred one surfaced 20 feet away. It watched me with those human eyes. I did the only thing I could think of. I started singing my grandmother's song, the protection song she'd taught me when I was 7 years old. I'd forgotten I even knew it until that moment. The words came out in Tlingit, a language I barely spoke anymore. The creature stopped moving. All of them stopped. The song was old, older than my grandmother, older than her grandmother. It was a song about respect, about balance, about understanding that we were guests in this place, not masters. The scarred Kushtaka tilted its head, listening. Then it dove under the water. For a moment, I thought they were going to attack, but they didn't. They just left. I stood there on that piece of floating ice, singing until my voice gave out. Mary was crying softly beside me. The storm was getting worse. We were rescued 36 hours later when the weather cleared. The Coast Guard helicopter pulled us off the ice. They found Tom's body, or what was left of it. They never found Jake or Sarah. The official report said hypothermia and wildlife attack. The Coast Guard determined that 3 rangers had died in a storm while searching for missing hunters. Tom was killed by a bear. Jake and Sarah drowned after falling through thin ice. The 3 original missing hunters were presumed dead. Mary Sivulik spent 2 months in a psychiatric facility. She still doesn't talk much about what happened, but she never went seal hunting again. Neither did anyone else in her family. That was 4 months ago. I'm still a ranger at Glacier Bay, still doing marine patrols. But I requested a transfer to a different section. I don't go near Muir Inlet anymore. Don't go near the old whaling station. And I've started listening to the old stories again. My grandmother died last month. I went to her funeral in Juneau, and afterward, her sister pulled me aside. She was 93 years old, barely able to walk, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "You saw them," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Did you remember the song?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That's why you're alive. The Kushtaka remember the old ways. They remember when we showed respect, when we only took what we needed, when we thanked the spirits for their gifts." She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "They're not evil, Vincent. They're guardians. But they've been protecting these waters for 1,000 years. And they don't forgive easily. What about Jake and Sarah? What about the hunters?" "Too much killing," she said quietly. "Too many seals taken without respect. Too many boats disturbing the breeding grounds. The Kushtaka were patient for a long time. But patience has limits." I think about that conversation a lot. I think about Jake being pulled under the ice, about Tom's screams cutting off in the darkness, about Mary's whispered words. Otter men with human eyes. The Park Service quietly implemented new hunting restrictions in the area. They won't say why, but traditional hunting near the old whaling station is now prohibited. The Muir Inlet is off limits from November through March. Nobody questions it. And sometimes, late at night in my cabin, I hear scratching at the door. Soft and persistent. I don't open it anymore. I just wait until dawn, because I know what's out there now. I've seen them moving under the ice, seen their tracks changing from otter to human and back again. Heard them calling in voices of people I know. The Kushtaka are real. And they're still watching. Last week, I was out on routine patrol near Bartlett Cove, nowhere near the prohibited area. I saw otter tracks on the shore. Normal ones, the right size and everything. But when I looked closer, one set of tracks led into the water. And they never came out. I didn't report it. What would I say? Instead, I keep my grandmother's song memorized. I carry tobacco to leave as offerings at the water's edge. I teach the younger rangers about respecting the traditional hunting grounds, even if I can't tell them the real reason why. And I never, ever go out alone on the ice anymore. If you're planning to visit Alaska, if you're thinking about hunting or fishing in the traditional waters, let me give you some advice. Respect the old places. Honor the old ways. If you take a seal, give thanks. If you see something strange on the ice, leave immediately. And if you hear a voice calling to you from the water, a voice that sounds like someone you know and love, asking for help, don't answer. Don't go closer. Just turn around and walk away. Because the Kushtaka are always hungry, and they never forget. My name is Margaret Frostborn, and I've been a ranger at Denali National Park for 13 years. Before that, I was an Army medic. I've set broken bones on frozen mountainsides, pulled hypothermic hikers out of ice caves, and once stitched up a man who'd been mauled by a grizzly while he was still conscious. I'm not easily scared. But I should have been. September 1979 hit Alaska hard that year. One day it was 50 degrees and golden with fall colors. The next morning, it dropped to 10 below zero. I was at the Wonder Lake Ranger Station, 40 miles from the nearest road, when the call came through on the radio. "Margaret, we need you out at the plateau." It was Dave Glacier, our best helicopter pilot. His voice had an edge to it. "Research team up, there is in trouble." I grabbed my medical kit, the big one, with the trauma supplies. "What kind of trouble?" "The weird kind." Dave paused. "They say something's been stealing their equipment. And one of them got hurt." "Hurt how?" "You'll see when we get there." 20 minutes later, I was strapped into Dave's Bell 206, watching the tundra roll beneath us like a frozen ocean. Dave was 29, thin as a rail, with a thick beard that never quite hid how young he looked. He'd been flying in Alaska for 8 years, and he knew these mountains better than anyone. "You believe in thunderbirds?" he asked suddenly. I laughed. "You mean those native stories?" "Dave, those are just golden eagles seen from bad angles, maybe a particularly big hawk." "Yeah." He didn't sound convinced. That's what I thought too. The research camp sat on a tundra plateau at 3,000 feet. It should have been visible from a mile away, bright orange tents against the gray-brown landscape. But as we got closer, something felt wrong. The birds were gone. I'm not talking about a few missing ravens. I mean times everything asterisk. No ptarmigans in the scrub willows, no hawks riding the thermals. The sky was empty in a way that made my stomach tight. "You seeing this?" Dave asked. "Yeah." I pressed my face against the window. "Where is everything?" The helicopter's compass started spinning, just slowly at first, then faster, the needle whipping around like it couldn't find north. Dave tapped it with his finger. "That's new," he muttered. Then we saw the camp. The tents were shredded. Not torn by wind times shredded, asterisk, like something with knives had methodically ripped them apart from above. Equipment was scattered across a quarter-mile of tundra. A generator lay on its side 200 feet from where it should have been. Nobody could have moved it that far without a vehicle. "Jesus," Dave whispered. We circled lower. That's when I saw the tracks. They were in the mud near one of the kettle ponds, 3-toed prints with curved talons. Each print was nearly 2 feet long. The stride between them was 12 feet. I'd seen eagle tracks before. These weren't eagle tracks. "Put us down," I said. "Fast." Dave found a flat spot 50 yards from what was left of the main tent. The moment I stepped out, the silence hit me. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes right before lightning strikes heavy and waiting. "Dr. Northwind?" I called out. Lisa Northwind was the lead geologist on this team. I'd met her once before. A sharp woman in her 40s who'd spent 20 years studying permafrost. "It's Ranger Frostborn. Where are you?" "Nothing." Dave came up beside me, carrying a radio. "I'm getting weird interference, like electrical." "From what?" "There's nothing out here but tundra." He shook his head, holding up the radio. Through the static, I could hear something that sounded almost like breathing, deep and slow. "Stay close," I told him. We found the first researcher near the southern edge of camp. Michael Sunrise, the team leader, was curled in his sleeping bag inside what remained of his tent. He was alive, but his eyes were wide and staring at nothing. "Dr. Sunrise?" I knelt beside him, checking his pulse. It was racing. "Can you hear me?" "It took them," he whispered. "Picked them right up." "Picked who up? Where's Dr. Northwind?" "The bird." His hand grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "It has a face, Margaret, a human face." My blood went cold, but I kept my voice steady. "You're in shock. Let me look at you." "I'm not in shock." He sat up, wild-eyed. "It came down during the night. Wings like a plane. It took Jennifer first, just grabbed her from her tent and carried her into the sky. We heard her screaming for maybe 30 seconds, then nothing." Dave and I exchanged looks. "Where's Dr. Northwind?" I asked again. "North Grove." Michael's voice dropped. "It hurt her, but she got away. She's hiding in the trees, but it's still up there, Margaret. Still watching." I looked up at the empty sky. Nothing but gray clouds and that horrible, pressing silence. The spruce grove was a quarter-mile north, a small cluster of trees that somehow survived this high up. Dave wanted to wait for backup, but the nearest help was 3 hours away by helicopter, and the weather was closing in. Already I could see dark clouds building to the west. "We go together," I said. "We find Dr. Northwind, we get everyone to the helicopter, and we leave." "What about Jennifer Coldstream?" Dave asked quietly. I didn't answer. If something had carried her into the sky, and we'd heard her scream, she wasn't someone I could help anymore. We moved fast across the tundra, medical kit bouncing against my hip. The wind had picked up, but it felt wrong. It kept changing direction every few seconds, like it couldn't decide which way to blow. The temperature was dropping too. My breath came out in white clouds. "Margaret." Dave had stopped. He was pointing at the ground. More tracks. These were fresh, the edges still sharp in the mud. They led toward the grove in measured steps, each print pressing deep into the frozen soil. Whatever had made them was heavy. "Those aren't bird tracks," Dave said. "Birds don't walk like that. Too deliberate." He was right. These tracks looked like something hunting, something that times thought times about where it placed its feet. We found Dr. Northwind 20 yards into the grove, pressed against a tree trunk. Her face was gray with pain and her jacket was torn. When she saw us, she tried to stand and gasped. "Don't move." I dropped beside her, already pulling out supplies. "Where are you hurt?" "My shoulder." She turned slightly, and I saw the wound. 3 deep punctures ran from her collarbone to her back, each one the width of my thumb. They were perfectly spaced, like the tines of a fork. Blood had soaked through her shirt and jacket, but it wasn't arterial. She'd live if I could stop the bleeding and keep her warm. "What did this?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "It's foot." Dr. Northwind's voice shook. It came down so fast, I barely saw it. Just this shadow. And then I was on the ground and it was standing over me. It looked at me, Margaret, right in my eyes. "Birds don't stand over people," Dave said. This one did. She grabbed my arm as I started cleaning the wounds. It had talons like knives, wings that stretched 30 feet, and a face. God, Margaret, it had a times face asterisk. Not human, but not bird either, something in between. And its eyes. Its eyes what? They knew me. They looked right through me, like it was reading my thoughts. Then Michael started screaming and it flew off. I heard Jennifer. She stopped, tears running down her face. I heard what it did to Jennifer. I heard her bones break when it— "Don't," I said gently, "save your strength." I packed the wounds with gauze and wrapped her shoulder tight. The punctures were deep, but clean, almost surgical. Whatever had done this had perfect control over its weapons. That's when I heard it. A sound like distant thunder, but the sky was still clear overhead. The sound rolled across the tundra, low and resonant. It made my chest vibrate. Dave had gone pale. "That's not thunder." "No, Doctor," Northwind whispered. "That's it. That's how it announces itself." The sound came again, closer. And with it, the wind shifted hard to the west, so sudden and violent that I nearly fell over. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. "We need to move," I said. "Now." Dave helped Dr. Northwind to her feet while I kept pressure on her wounds. We started back toward the helicopter, moving as fast as we dared. Behind us, the trees in the grove began to bend, not from wind, but from something massive moving through them. "Don't look back," Dave panted. "Just keep moving." But I looked. The shadow came first, a massive shape that blocked out the sun, even though it was hundreds of feet up. It moved across the tundra toward us, and where it passed, the grass bent flat. The shadow was times wrong asterisk. Shadows don't have that much weight. They don't move against the wind. Then I saw the thing casting it. Wings. Enormous wings, the color of gold and brown, stretched across the sky. Each feather was the size of my arm. The body was thick and powerful, built like a raptor, but scaled up to impossible size. And at the front, where the head should be, Dr. Northwind was right. It had a face, not quite human, not quite bird. The features were flattened, with a hooked beak that somehow suggested a nose and mouth. Its eyes were amber and huge, set forward like a predator's. And they were looking right at us with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. "Run," Dave shouted. We ran. The helicopter was still 100 yards away when the thing dove. I heard the wind scream through its feathers, a sound like a jet engine mixed with thunder. The ground shook when it landed between us and the Bell 206. Up close, it was even more impossible. 15 feet tall at least, with talons that dug into the tundra like stakes. Its wings folded against its body with a sound like sails snapping, and that face, those amber eyes, studied us with cold calculation. Thunderbird, Doctor. Northwind breathed. The Athabascans were right, it's real. The creature's head tilted, bird-like. Then it opened its beak and made a sound that shouldn't have been possible. It spoke, not in words I understood, but in a voice that carried weight and age. The sound rolled across the plateau like distant drums, and somehow I knew what it was saying. Asterisk, you disturbed the sleeping place, you woke what should stay buried. Asterisk, we didn't mean, I started. The Thunderbird's eyes fixed on me, and my voice died. In that gaze, I saw centuries. I saw this land before humans came, saw the glaciers advancing and retreating, saw the bones of ancient things buried under permafrost. And I saw us fragile and temporary, scratching at the surface of something we didn't understand. Then it screamed. The sound was so loud that I felt it in my bones. Dave dropped to his knees, hands over his ears. Dr. Northwind collapsed against me, and the Thunderbird spread its wings, a span so wide that its shadow swallowed us completely. The Thunderbird launched itself into the air with a single downstroke that knocked me flat. Wind hammered my face, carrying the smell of ozone and something else, something ancient and cold, like opening a tomb. Get to the helicopter! I hauled Dr. Northwind upright, half dragging her across the tundra. Behind us, the Thunderbird was climbing, its wings catching thermals that hadn't existed seconds before. The clouds were churning now, building into a storm that had no business forming that fast. Dave reached the Bell 206 first and yanked the door open. Come on, come on. We were 20 feet away when the Thunderbird dove again. This time it wasn't hunting us, it hit the helicopter. The impact sounded like a car crash. Metal shrieked. The bird's talons punched through the thin aluminum skin of the fuselage like it was paper. The entire aircraft rocked on its skids. No. Dave started forward, but I grabbed him. Don't. The Thunderbird ripped a chunk of the helicopter's tail off and threw it 100 yards across the tundra. Then it turned its head toward us, and I saw something in those amber eyes that was worse than rage. Asterisk. Satisfaction. Asterisk. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was trapping us here. The camp, Doctor. Northwind gasped. Radio in the camp. We can call for help. We ran back toward the shredded tents, the Thunderbird circling overhead like a vulture. The sky had gone dark now, full of clouds that rotated in a slow spiral with the bird at the center. Lightning flickered between the clouds, not natural lightning, but something that moved with purpose. Following the Thunderbird's path, we found Michael Sunrise still in his tent, shaking uncontrollably. It's back, he said. It's going to kill all of us. Not yet, it won't. I dug through the scattered equipment until I found the radio. The battery was still good, but when I keyed the transmit button, all I got was static and that strange electrical breathing sound. Dave grabbed the radio from me and tried different frequencies. Nothing. It's jamming us somehow. I don't know how, but thunder cracked directly overhead, so close that I felt the shockwave in my chest. Through the torn tent fabric, I saw the Thunderbird land on top of the highest point nearby, a small rocky outcrop maybe 200 yards away. It settled there like a gargoyle, wings folded, watching us. Why isn't it attacking? Michael whispered. Because it doesn't need to, Dr. Northwind said quietly. She was looking at her field notes, scattered across the tent floor. Look at the BAS4. Dates. September 19th, 1979. 84 years ago to the day, a gold rush expedition disappeared from this exact plateau. 15 miners. They were never found. How do you know that? She held up a journal page. Because I found their camp last week, 20 feet down in the permafrost. And I found something else. What? Bones. Big ones. Buried in a circular pattern like a nest. I thought they were from an extinct species, maybe a terror bird or a forest wrassid. I was going to announce the discovery next month. Her voice cracked. I didn't know, I thought it was just fossils. The Thunderbird screamed again, and this time I understood. Dr. Northwind had disturbed a grave. Not just any grave, the creature's own resting place. Maybe its mate, maybe its young. And now it wanted payment. We can't fight that thing, Dave said. We can't even hurt it. He was right. What could we do? Shoot it? The nearest gun was 40 miles away, and I doubted bullets would stop something that could control the weather. Run? We were 3,000 feet up, with no transportation and a storm building around us. Hide? It could probably smell us from a mile away. Then we give it what it wants, I said. Everyone stared at me. We can't bring back Jennifer, I continued, but we can show respect. Dr. Northwind, where exactly did you dig? South side of the plateau, about a quarter mile from here. Show me. We moved fast through the growing storm, bent against wind that now howled across the tundra. The Thunderbird followed overhead, sometimes close enough that I could see individual feathers rippling. It didn't attack, it was waiting. The dig site was marked with stakes and string. Dr. Northwind's excavation had exposed a layer of permafrost mixed with bones, huge bones, arranged in a careful pattern around a central space. There, she said, pointing to the center. That's where the largest skeleton was. I removed it for study. It's back at camp. We're bringing it back. Margaret, that thing weighs 200 pounds. Then we carried 200 pounds. It took all 4 of us and 20 minutes of exhausting work, but we got the bones back to the dig site. They were massive. Each wing bone was 6 feet long, and the skull was the size of a wolf's. Ancient, powerful, sacred. We laid them back in their resting place as carefully as we could. I wasn't religious, but I said a prayer anyway, for Jennifer Coldstream, for the miners who died 84 years ago, for whatever these bones used to be. The Thunderbird landed at the edge of the excavation. Up close, silent and still, it was even more terrifying. Each talon was as long as my forearm, curved and sharp as glass. Its feathers shimmered with colors I couldn't name, gold and bronze and something that looked like captured lightning. And that face, impossibly human, watched us with ancient eyes. Asterisk. You return what was taken. Asterisk. Its posture seemed to say. Asterisk. That is good. But debts remain. Asterisk. We're sorry, I said, and my voice sounded tiny in the storm. We didn't know. We didn't understand. The Thunderbird's head tilted, its eyes fixed on Dr. Northwind, still bleeding from her shoulder wounds. Then on Michael, shaking with shock. Then on Dave. And then on me. I felt its gaze like weight, pressing against my chest. It was reading me, reading all of us. Judging. Asterisk. One has already paid. Asterisk. I understood somehow. Asterisk. One more payment is required. Asterisk. No. I whispered. Please no. But I knew what was coming. I'd known since we found Jennifer's body, or what was left of it, scattered across the tundra near the northern ridge. We'd found her while moving the bones, and I'd quietly covered her with my jacket so the others wouldn't see. The Thunderbird wanted balance. One of its own had been disturbed. One of ours had paid the price. But the debt wasn't settled yet. It was looking at Dave. Run, I shouted. But Dave didn't run. He looked at me, at Dr. Northwind, at Michael, and he smiled. A sad, tired smile. Get them out of here, Margaret. When the weather breaks, get them home. Dave, don't. The Thunderbird moved faster than something that size should be able to move. One moment, Dave was standing beside me. The next, those massive talons had closed around his chest and the creature was launching skyward with him. I watched him rise into the storm, watched him get smaller and smaller against the churning clouds. And then I looked away before I could see. But I heard, everyone heard, the storm broke 3 hours later. By then, we'd made a shelter from the ruined tents and gotten Dr. Northwind's bleeding under control. Michael had stopped shaking enough to help. And we'd buried what we could find of Dave Glacier with rocks from the plateau. The Thunderbird was gone, but I could still feel it watching from somewhere in the boat of Keat clouds. Why you? Dr. Northwind asked as I checked her bandages. Why did it look at you last? Why did it take Dave instead? I'd been thinking about that. Because of this. I held up my medical kit. Because I heal. because I try to save lives. It recognized that, I think. It killed Jennifer and Dave. I know. My hands were shaking. But it let us live. It could have killed all of us. It chose not to. That doesn't make it right. No. But it makes it consistent. I stared out at the tundra, at the bones now reburied in their ancient resting place. We disturbed something sacred. The old miners did the same thing 84 years ago, and the Thunderbird killed them all. But we showed respect. We returned what was taken. So it only took 2 instead of 4. That's not justice, Margaret. That's murder. Maybe. Or maybe it's older than justice. Maybe it's just balance. The radio crackled. Through the static, I heard a human voice base camp, finally getting through now that the storm had cleared. I grabbed the handset. This is Ranger Frostborn. We need immediate evacuation. 2 dead, 1 injured. Helicopter is destroyed. What happened to the helicopter? I looked at Dr. Northwind and Michael. What could we say? That a 15-foot Thunderbird with a human face had torn it apart? That an ancient guardian spirit had killed our pilot to balance a cosmic debt? Weather damage, I said. Severe winds. We need extraction now. Copy that. We'll have a bird to you in 90 minutes. While we waited, I walked out to the place where the Thunderbird had stood. Its prints were still there in the mud, 3-toed, impossibly large, pressed deep into the earth. I knelt beside them, studying the details. In the center of each print was a symbol, not carved, pressed, like the bird had deliberately shaped its talons to leave a mark. It took me a moment to recognize it. An Athabascan, protection symbol, one that meant sacred ground and respected dead. It had marked its territory, and it had let us see the marking. Message received, I whispered. The rescue helicopter arrived with the sunset, painting the tundra gold and red. As we loaded Dr. Northwind aboard, I looked up one last time at the empty sky. For just a moment, I saw a silhouette against the clouds, massive wings spread wide, circling, watching. Then it was gone. They blamed the helicopter crash on the storm. The official report said sudden wind shear had destroyed the tail section, and Dave had died trying to repair it. They said Jennifer Coldstream had wandered from camp in shock during the weather event and fallen from a cliff. The talon wounds on Dr. Northwind's shoulder were attributed to a golden eagle defending its territory. I didn't correct them. Some truths are too big, too old, too dangerous to speak out loud. The moment you start talking about 15-foot Thunderbirds with human faces, you become the crazy one. You become the person nobody trusts to tell the truth about anything else. But I know what I saw. Dr. Northwind knows too. She quit geology 3 months later and moved to Anchorage. Last I heard, she was teaching elementary school about as far from permafrost excavation as you can get. She sends me a Christmas card every year. She never mentions the plateau. Michael Sunrise finished his degree but never went back to field research. He works for an oil company now, doing surveys from aerial photos. Nothing that requires being alone on the tundra. The dig site was quietly classified as culturally significant. Research permits for that area are denied now. No explanation given. The Park Service put up a discreet marker a mile away, warning hikers about unstable ground conditions. Nobody goes there anymore. I'm still a ranger at Denali. Still doing backcountry medical response. Still flying in helicopters, though I requested a transfer away from Wonder Lake, and I got it without question. Whoever approved that transfer knew something. They never said what, but I see things now that I didn't see before. Last week, I was flying over the Alaska range when I spotted a shadow on the snow. A big shadow, too big for any bird that's supposed to exist. It was there for maybe 5 seconds, then it was gone. My pilot didn't notice. But I did. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is right, I hear thunder rolling across the mountains even though the sky is clear. And I wonder if it's really thunder, or if it's something older, something that's been here since before we were, and will be here long after we're gone. The Athabascans have stories about thunderbirds. They say the birds are guardians, protectors of sacred places and ancient burial grounds. They say if you respect the land and honor the dead, the thunderbirds will leave you alone. But if you disturb what should stay buried, if you take what isn't yours to take, they'll come for you on silent wings and you'll never see them until it's too late. I used to think those were just stories. I don't anymore. Dave Glacier was buried in Anchorage, But I visit his grave when I can. I bring flowers and I tell him I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't run faster, didn't think quicker, didn't somehow save him from what came out of the sky. But mostly I thank him. Because he chose. In that final moment, when the Thunderbird was deciding who would pay the debt, Dave chose to go. He chose to let the rest of us live. That's the kind of person he was. Jennifer Coldstream's family never got the full story. How could I tell them that their daughter was taken by something out of legend? That she died paying a price for disturbing ground that had been sacred for thousands of years? I sent them a letter instead, saying she died doing what she loved, exploring the wild places of Alaska, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. It's not the truth, but it's kinder than the truth. Sometimes kindness matters more. I still carry my medical kit everywhere, still train for wilderness emergencies, still teach survival courses, still try to save lives whenever I can, because that's what the Thunderbird saw in me that day on the plateau. That's why I'm alive to tell this story. Not because I was brave, not because I was smart, because I heal. And in a world where ancient things still guard ancient places, where debts must be balanced and sacred ground must be respected, that matters. A healer is valuable. A healer might be spared, but I won't forget what it cost. If you ever find yourself in the Alaska backcountry, respect the land. Honor the old places. Don't disturb what's been buried. And if you see a shadow that's too big, if you hear thunder on a clear day, if the birds suddenly go silent for no reason, leave. Don't ask questions. Don't investigate. Just leave, as fast as you can, because some guardians never rest. Some debts are never fully paid, and some things in the sky are hungrier than you can possibly imagine. My name is Margaret Frostborn, and I survived the Thunderbird of Denali. But I'll never stop seeing those amber eyes in every shadow, never stop hearing those wings in every storm. And on clear nights, when the stars are bright over the Alaska range, I look up at the sky and remember, we are not alone up here. We never were. My name is Alexander Thunderborn, and I've spent 20 years keeping people alive in the most dangerous wilderness in America. Gates of the Arctic National Park, Alaska, where winter doesn't just kill you, it erases you. At 46 years old, I've pulled frozen climbers off mountains, tracked lost hikers through blizzards, and taught survival to people who thought they were tough until they met real cold. My grandmother was Inupiat. She used to tell me stories about the Tornarsuk ice spirits that guarded the old places. Giant beings made of living ice, she said, protectors of sacred ground. I'd smile and nod, but I never believed her. I figured Tornarsuk were just old stories about aggressive polar bears, maybe some folklore to keep people away from dangerous areas. I should have listened. It was January 1988 when the call came through on my satellite phone. Military archaeologists had set up camp near the Arajech Peaks, about 150 miles from the nearest village. They were digging up an old weather station from the 1942, looking for historical artifacts. Simple job, go check on them, make sure they had proper cold weather gear, help them file their permits. The temperature was 45 below zero. The sun hadn't risen in 60 days, wouldn't rise for another month. Just endless night, lit only by stars and the occasional aurora. A 3-day snowmobile journey to get there, and I'd be completely alone once I left the ranger station. I packed my gear with the care of someone who knows that one mistake means death. Arctic sleeping bag rated to 60 below, emergency shelter, extra fuel for my snowmobile, satellite phone with spare batteries, food for 2 weeks, rifle for polar bears. Everything I needed to survive the kind of cold that turns spit into ice before it hits the ground. Be careful out there, Alex, my supervisor said as I loaded up my Arctic cat. Weather service says a big storm's coming. There's always a storm. Coming, I replied. That was the truth in January. Up here, you don't wait for good weather. There is no good weather. I set out at what passed for dawn, just a slight lightening of the darkness to deep blue instead of black. My headlight cut through the gloom as I rode into the mountains. The sound of my engine was the only noise in a world of silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pushing down on you. After 6 hours of riding, I started to notice something strange. There were no animal tracks, none. Usually, you'd see Arctic fox, maybe caribou, sometimes wolf prints, but the snow around me was perfect and empty, like nothing living had been here in weeks. That's when I saw the first footprint. I stopped my snowmobile and climbed off to look closer. The print was huge, easily 18 inches long, shaped like a human foot but far too big, and it was deep. I mean really deep, like whatever made it weighed 1,000 pounds. The edges were crisp and clear in the hard-packed snow. I knelt down next to it, pulling off my glove for just a second to touch the print. The snow inside was colder than the surrounding area. That didn't make sense. Snow is snow, it should all be the same temperature. I stood up and followed the prints with my eyes. They led straight toward where the archaeological camp should be, about 2 miles ahead. Each step was perfectly spaced, like something had walked with steady, measured strides through the deep snow that would have had me sinking to my knees. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was from their equipment, some kind of tracked vehicle that made weird impressions, but the prints had toes, 5 of them, clearly visible. The wind picked up, and I swear I heard something in it. A low sound, almost like words, but in a language I didn't quite understand. It reminded me of when my grandmother spoke Inuktitut, the old tongue. I shook my head and climbed back on my snowmobile. I was just cold and tired. That was all. The mind plays tricks in extreme conditions. I'd taught that in survival classes 100 times. But as I rode toward the camp, that feeling of being watched never went away. I reached the excavation site just as my watch showed 3 p.m., though you couldn't tell by looking at the sky. It was as dark as midnight. The camp was destroyed. Tents were ripped apart, their fabric shredded and scattered across the snow. Equipment was everywhere, laptops smashed, tools bent and broken. A generator was flipped upside down, 50 yards from where it should have been. Nobody could have thrown something that heavy that far. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Ranger Tunderborn. Is anyone here?" Nothing, just wind and darkness. I pulled my rifle and started walking through the camp. My headlamp showed me things that made my stomach turn. There was blood in the snow, frozen solid, not a lot, but enough to know someone had been hurt. Then I saw the excavation itself. They dug down through the permafrost, maybe 15 feet deep, exposing what looked like an old stone structure. The 1,940 weather station had been built right on top of something much older. Inside the pit, I could see bones, human bones, arranged in a careful pattern, and artifacts carved ivory, stone tools, things that had been buried for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. "Dr. Snowfield?" I called again. The military team leader was supposed to be here, along with 3 others. "This is Park Service. Where are you?" A sound came from behind a overturned supply crate. I spun around, rifle ready. "Don't shoot." A woman's voice, shaking with cold and fear. Dr. Emma Snowfield crawled out from under the crate. She was maybe 40, wearing a military parka, but her face was white with cold, and her lips were turning blue. "Thank God," she whispered. "We have to leave. Right now. We have to get out of here." I pulled off my outer jacket and dowel, wrapped it around her. "Where's the rest of your team?" "Dead. James is dead. Mike and Lisa, I don't know. They ran when it came back." "When what came back?" She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in even through my thick sleeve. "The thing that lives here. The thing we woke up." I helped her to my snowmobile and started a fire using some debris from the camp. As she warmed up, she told me what had happened. "We found the burial site 3 days ago," she said. "Traditional Inupiat, very old, very sacred. We should have stopped digging, should have contacted the tribal council. But James, Dr. Frostpeak, he wanted the artifacts. Said they were important for understanding pre-contact Arctic cultures." She started crying. That first night, the temperature dropped. Not gradually all at once. Our thermometer went from -20 to -60 in 5 minutes. "That's not possible. That can't happen." "What else?" I asked. "We heard something walking around the camp. Footsteps in the snow. Heavy footsteps. But when we looked outside, there was nothing there, just these prints. Huge prints. I saw them on my way in," I said. "The second night, it showed itself." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Tall. So tall. made of ice but alive. Its eyes glowed blue, like the heart of a glacier. It spoke in Inuktitut. I don't speak the language, but James did. He went pale when he heard it. What did it say? Leave this place. Leave the dead in peace. She looked at me. We should have listened. But James laughed. He actually laughed and said we were experiencing some kind of mass hallucination from the cold. Where is James now? She pointed toward the excavation pit. Down there, with the thing he didn't believe in. I walked to the edge and looked down. Dr. James Frostpeak lay at the bottom, perfectly preserved by the cold. His eyes were open, frozen wide in terror. His skin was blue-white, covered in frost. But the strangest thing was how he looked like he'd been frozen from the inside out. That was this morning, Emma said behind me. It came in broad moonlight. Walked right into our camp. James tried to grab one of the artifacts to take with him when we ran. The thing touched him. Just one touch. And he froze solid in seconds. The wind picked up again. And this time I definitely heard words. My grandmother's language, flowing through the air like music made of ice. We need to go, I said, now. But when I turned around, my snowmobile was covered in ice. Thick ice, coating every surface. The engine was frozen solid. In the few minutes I'd been looking at the body, something had come and gone. And it had made sure we couldn't leave. The emergency shelter, I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. We need to set it up. Get warm. Think. Emma and I worked fast, our hands shaking from more than just cold. The shelter was a small orange tent, designed to keep 2 people alive in extreme conditions. We set it up against a large rock that would block some of the wind. Inside, I lit a small propane heater and pulled out the satellite phone. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. The screen showed full battery, but it couldn't connect to any satellite. It's blocking us, Emma said. It's keeping us here. Let's say I believe you, I replied. Let's say there really is some kind of spirit or creature out there. Why? Why is it doing this? We disturbed the burial site. In traditional Inupiat belief, burial sites are sacred. They're protected by guardians Tornarsuk, ice spirits that watch over the dead. The word made me think of my grandmother. All those stories I'd ignored. So what does it want? I asked. I think it wants us to respect what we found, to leave the artifacts alone, to bury them again. I looked out through the small, clear panel in the shelter. Nothing moved in the darkness except blowing snow. But I felt it out, there. Watching, waiting. Then that's what we'll do, I said. At first light, well, when it's a bit brighter, we'll rebury everything, put it back the way it was. Emma shook her head. James took something, a carved ivory figure, very old. He put it in his pack before it got him. The Tornarsuk won't be satisfied until that comes back too, which meant going down into that pit, with James's frozen body. We waited in the shelter as the hours crawled by. The heater kept us alive, but barely. The temperature outside had dropped even further. My thermometer read -70. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in less than a minute. Around what should have been 8 a.m., Emma grabbed my arm. Do you hear that? I did. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Circling our shelter, the orange fabric of the tent suddenly went rigid. Ice was spreading across it, climbing from the ground up. Within seconds, our entire shelter was encased in a shell of ice. It's going to freeze us, Emma said. Just like James. I grabbed my rifle and fired 3 shots through the tent wall. The bullets punched through the ice, but behind them, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A face, huge, easily 3 feet across. Made entirely of ice, but with eyes that glowed from within. Blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The mouth opened, revealing teeth like icicles. It spoke. The words were Inuktitut, but somehow I understood them. My grandmother's blood maybe, or just pure terror opening up some part of my brain. The thief took what is not his. The guardian demands return. Return the stolen, or become the ice. Then it was gone. The ice coating our shelter cracked and fell away, leaving us in darkness again. We have to get that artifact, I said. Now. We put on every piece of warm clothing we had and stepped outside. The cold hit like a physical force. My face went numb instantly. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. The excavation pit was 50 yards away. 50 yards through snow and darkness, with that thing somewhere out there. We made it 20 yards before we saw it. The Tornarsuk stood between us and the pit, 14 feet tall, shaped like a man but built from solid ice. Frost poured off its body like steam. The air around it shimmered with cold so intense it bent the light. It raised one massive arm and pointed at the pit. The message was clear. We could go there. It would let us. We walked past it, and the cold intensified with every step. By the time we reached the edge of the pit, my fingers were numb even inside my gloves. "I'll go down," I said. "You stay up here. If anything happens, run for the shelter." "Run where?" Emma asked. "We're 150 miles from anything." She was right, but I went down anyway. The pit was darker than the night above. My headlamp showed me the bones, the artifacts, and James's body. His pack was still on his back, frozen to him. I tried not to look at his face as I searched the pack. My fingers were so cold I could barely make them work. Everything in the pack was frozen together: notebooks, tools, film canisters. Then I found it. A small ivory figure, no bigger than my thumb. It showed a man with a seal, carved with incredible detail. Hundreds of years old, maybe thousands. Something moved behind me. I spun around. One of the burial skeletons had shifted. No, not shifted. Stood up. The bones were covered in frost, held together by ice instead of flesh. The Tornarsuk could make things from ice, dead things, old things. "I'm taking it back," I said out loud. "I'm putting it back where it belongs." The frozen skeleton stopped moving. Slowly, it laid back down in its original position. I climbed out of that pit faster than I'd ever climbed anything. Emma pulled me up the last few feet, and we ran back toward the burial site's entrance, a stone structure that had been exposed by the excavation. The Tornarsuk stood there, waiting. I held up the ivory figure. "We're giving it back," I said. "We're fixing what was broken." The creature didn't move. Behind it, I could see other shapes in the darkness. More ice figures, smaller Tornarsuk, or maybe just ice given temporary life, an army of frozen guardians. "My grandmother was Inupiat," I said, switching to what little Inuktitut I remembered. "She taught me to respect the old ways, to honor the dead. We made a mistake. Let us fix it." The Tornarsuk tilted its massive head, studying me with those glowing blue eyes. Then it stepped aside. Emma and I approached the stone structure. In the darkness, I could see now what it really was. Not part of the weather station at all. This was ancient. A tomb, carefully built and buried, protecting the dead who'd been laid here long before any white man came to Alaska. We climbed down into the structure, moving carefully around the bones. I found where the ivory figure belonged a small hollow in the stone wall, shaped exactly to hold it. Other artifacts were placed around it in a careful pattern. This wasn't just a burial. It was sacred. "James took more than this," Emma whispered. She pulled several items from her own pockets. "I found these in his tent. He was planning to smuggle them out." More ivory carvings, stone tools, small bones carved with symbols. She placed each one back in its proper spot, her hands shaking. When the last piece was in place, the temperature changed. It was still freezing, still deadly cold, but the unnatural chill that had been eating at us faded. The air felt clean again, like whatever sickness had been in it was gone. We climbed back out of the structure. The Tornarsuk stood above us, and now I could see it clearly in the starlight. Not just ice, living ice, ancient ice, ice that had been here since the glaciers carved these valleys, a guardian that had watched over this place for thousands of years. "We'll fill it in," I said. "Cover it back up, make sure nobody disturbs it again." The creature made a sound like wind through ice caves. Then it reached out one massive hand toward me. I should have run. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I stood still. Its finger touched my chest, just for a second. Cold beyond anything I'd ever felt spread through me, into my bones, into my heart. For a moment, I understood. I felt the weight of centuries, the duty of protection, the love for the old ways and the old dead who deserved rest. Then it withdrew its hand and stepped back. The other ice figures, there must have been 20 of them surrounding the camp, began to fade. They didn't melt. They just became less solid, like they were made of mist instead of ice. Within seconds, they were gone. The Tornarsuk was the last to go. It looked at me one more time, and I heard its voice in my head, clear as anything. Remember, protect, honor. Then it, too, faded into the wind and snow, leaving Emma and me alone in the darkness. We spent the next 12 hours burying that site. We pushed snow back into the excavation. We collapsed the entrance to the stone structure. We scattered the military equipment, making it look like a storm had destroyed the camp, which, in a way, one had. When we were done, you couldn't tell anyone had been there at all. My snowmobile was still frozen, but Emma's smaller generator had survived. We managed to thaw my engine enough to get it running. As we loaded up to leave, I saw something in the snow. Footprints, one set leading away into the mountains, 18 inches long, perfectly spaced. "Will it let us leave?" Emma asked. "I think so," I said. We fixed what was broken. But as we rode away from that place, I looked back once. Standing on a ridge above the camp was a tall figure, dark against the stars, watching, making sure we really left. I raised one hand in respect. The figure raised one massive arm in return. Then it was gone. The military classified everything, of course. The official report said the team encountered equipment failure and extreme weather. Dr. James Frostpeak died of exposure. Sergeant Mike Icebreaker and Corporal Lisa Whitefrost were never found listed as missing, presumed dead. Emma and I were ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements. When I refused, unless the site was protected, they agreed. The entire area was designated environmentally sensitive and closed to all archaeological work. No permits would be granted. Ever. Dr. Snowfield left the military not long after. Last I heard, she was teaching anthropology at a university in Seattle, specializing in indigenous cultures and sacred sites. But I stayed. 20 years in the Arctic became 25, then 30. I'm 61 now, and I still patrol these mountains, and I still feel it out there. Every time the temperature drops suddenly, every time the wind sounds like words, every time I find those footprints in impossible places, the Tornarsuk is still there, still watching, still guarding the old places. I've become something like a bridge between the old world and the new. When archaeologists or scientists want to work in certain areas, they come to me first. I tell them which places are safe and which places are protected. Most of them think I'm just being overcautious, worried about environmental damage. But some of them, the ones who've spent enough time in the deep wilderness, they understand. They see it in my eyes when I talk about certain valleys, certain mountains. They hear something in my voice that tells them I'm not talking about grizzly bears or avalanche danger. I dream about that night sometimes. In my dreams, I'm standing in the excavation pit, and the Tornarsuk is showing me things. Other sites, scattered across Alaska and northern Canada, other guardians watching over other sacred places. An entire, hidden world that exists alongside ours, invisible to most people. My grandmother was right about everything. The Tornarsuk are real. The old spirits still walk the ice. And they're not evil, they're just doing what they've always done. Protecting what's sacred from those who don't understand. Last week, a group of tourists hired me to guide them into the Origich Peaks. Nice people, respectful, just wanted to see the aurora. We camped about 10 miles from that old site. On the second night, one of them, a young woman from California, woke me up. "Mr. Tundraborn," she whispered, "there's something outside the tent, something big." I stepped outside and saw them immediately, footprints in the fresh snow, circling our camp, 18 inches long. "Perfect. What made those?" she asked. I looked up at the dark sky, at the stars that seemed cold and distant. Somewhere out there, in the darkness and ice, something was watching, making sure we were safe, making sure we respected this place. "Just the wind?" I told her. "Playing tricks on the snow. Nothing to worry about." She went back to her tent, not quite believing me but willing to accept the lie. I stayed outside for a while, looking at those tracks. Then I placed my hand over my heart, the spot where the Tornarsuk had touched me all those years ago, and nodded to the darkness. The wind picked up, carrying words in a language older than English, older than Russian, older than anything European. My grandmother's language. The first language of this land. I understood every word. "Thank you, guardian," I said quietly. The ice remembers. And so do I. When I went back into my tent, the footprints were already filling with fresh snow, erasing themselves like they'd never been there at all. But I know better. I know that in the deepest cold, in the longest nights, the Tornarsuk walk. They guard the old ways. They protect the sacred places. And if you're foolish enough to disturb what should stay buried, they'll make sure you understand the price. The ice remembers everything. And now, so do I. My name is Jonathan Deepwood, and I've been a forest ranger for 15 years. Before that, I spent 10 years as a commercial logger, cutting down the same trees I now protect. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but when you spend enough time in the woods, you start to see things differently. You start to understand what we're losing. I never believed in spirits or magic. Not the Kushtaka stories the Tlingit elders told, not the tree spirits, none of it. Trees are just plants, complex, beautiful plants, but plants all the same. They don't think. They don't watch. They don't remember. I was wrong about that. It was March 1976 when everything changed. I was stationed in the Tongass National Forest on Admiralty Island, Alaska. If you've never been there, picture this: trees so tall they disappear into the fog, roots thicker than your body, moss covering everything like green carpet. The Sitka spruce trees there are 500 years old, some even older. When you stand among them, you feel small. You feel like you're in a cathedral. The weather that week was terrible. Rain came down in sheets, and fog banks rolled in from the ocean every few hours. The kind of weather that keeps float planes grounded and makes you feel completely alone, even when you're not. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. A logging survey team had reported strange activity near an old-growth grove on the eastern side of the island. They said their equipment was being sabotaged. Stakes moved overnight, compasses going haywire. One guy swore he saw trees moving on their own. I figured it was just nerves. Logging teams get superstitious sometimes, especially in remote areas. But I had to check it out. That was my job. Eddie Saltwater flew me in on his Cessna 180. Eddie was a bush pilot, 35 years old, with 12 years of Alaska flying under his belt. He could land that plane on a postage stamp if he had to. We were friends, had been since I moved to the island. You really think something's going on out there? Eddie asked as we flew over the dense canopy. Probably just somebody playing pranks, I said. Maybe bears got into their camp. Eddie didn't look convinced. The Tlingit folks won't go near that grove. My grandmother used to say the trees there are awake. Your grandmother also said you'd grow a tail if you lied to your mother. Eddie laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, but I never tested that theory. We landed on a small lake about half a mile from the grove. The water was choppy, and Eddie had to make 3 passes before he felt good about setting down. When we finally touched down, the rain was coming down so hard I could barely see the shoreline. I'll wait here, Eddie said. Radio check every 2 hours. If I don't hear from you by dark, I'm calling for help. It's just a survey site, Eddie. I'll be fine. I grabbed my pack and stepped out onto the float. The water was black and, still beneath the rain, like oil. The forest beyond was even darker, the trees pressing close to the lake's edge like they were trying to see what we were doing. The walk to the survey site took 30 minutes. The trail was barely visible, overgrown and muddy. I'm a big guy, 6'2", 200 pounds, but I felt like the forest was closing in around me. The trees here were massive, their trunks so wide 3 men couldn't have wrapped their arms around them. And it was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, you'd hear birds, squirrels, the rustle of smaller animals in the undergrowth. But here, there was nothing. Just the rain hitting the leaves and the sound of my own breathing. When I reached the survey camp, I stopped cold. The tents were destroyed, not torn down by wind or knocked over by bears. They were wrapped around tree trunks 30 feet off the ground, like the trees had picked them up and twisted them around themselves like ribbon. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My brain kept trying to find a logical explanation. A tornado? But there was no other damage. Bears? They don't climb that high, and they don't arrange things. I pulled out my radio. Eddie, you there? Static. Then his voice. Yeah, I'm here. You okay? The camp is. Eddie, something's really wrong here. What do you mean? I described what I was seeing. There was a long pause on the other end. Jonathan, get out of there. Now. I need to find the survey team first. There were 4 people up here. Jonathan, 2 hours, Eddie. I'll call you in 2 hours. I switched off the radio before he could argue. That's when I noticed the survey stakes. They were supposed to mark trees for potential harvesting, driven into the ground in a grid pattern. But they'd been moved. All of them. They were now arranged in a perfect circle around the largest Sitka spruce I'd ever seen, a tree that must have been 200 feet tall and at least 15 feet across at the base. And they weren't just moved, they were driven into solid rock, something that should have been impossible without heavy equipment. I walked toward the big tree slowly, my heart pounding. The bark was deeply furrowed, dark with moisture. Up close, I could see something that made my stomach turn. There were faces in the bark, not carved, grown, knots and whorls that looked exactly like screaming human faces, dozens of them, covering the lower trunk. I reached out to touch one. The tree moved. I jumped back so fast I nearly fell. The branch above me, a branch as thick as my torso, had shifted. Not from wind. There was no wind. It had moved on its own, like an arm stretching. I stood frozen, staring up at the tree. Nothing else moved. The rain kept falling. The forest stayed silent. You're seeing things, I whispered to myself, just nerves. But my hands were shaking as I pulled out my Wildduff field notebook. I'm a ranger. I'm trained to observe and document. Even when things don't make sense, you write them down. I started walking the perimeter of the grove, taking notes. The trees here were arranged in a pattern, not the random spacing you'd expect in a natural forest. They formed concentric rings, all centered on the big spruce. And their roots, I knelt down and brushed away some moss. The roots weren't just intertwined, they were braided together, woven like rope, running in straight lines from tree to tree. In nature, roots spread randomly, searching for water and nutrients. These looked intentional, planned. I was so focused on the roots that I didn't notice the smell at first. When I did, it stopped me cold. It smelled like sap, but thicker, heavier, almost like blood. I looked up slowly. About 20 feet away, one of the smaller spruce trees, still 100 feet tall, was bleeding. Dark, red-brown liquid ran down its trunk in thick streams, pooling at its base. And in that pool, half submerged, was a chainsaw. I walked over carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. The chainsaw was relatively new, probably from the survey team. When I picked it up, the bar and chain were completely jam-packed with wood pulp so dense it had seized the mechanism solid. I'd been a logger for 10 years. I'd seen equipment fail in every way possible. But this was different. The wood pulp had been forced times into times the mechanism, like the tree had deliberately destroyed the saw. A sound made me spin around. It was soft, almost like a whisper, or like wind through leaves, except there was still no wind. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the vastness of the forest. The whispering stopped. Then, one by one, the trees around me began to creak. Not the normal creaking of wood settling. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like they were communicating. I backed toward the center of the grove, toward the big spruce. My rational mind was screaming that this couldn't be happening. Trees don't move. Trees don't make sounds on their own. But I couldn't deny what I was seeing and hearing. That's when I found the first body. Dr. Patricia Mossbank was lying at the base of the big spruce, unconscious but breathing. She was wrapped in vines, not dead vines, but living ones, still green and growing. They were wound around her arms and legs, pinning her to the ground but not hurting her, almost like they were holding her. "Patricia." I dropped to my knees beside her and started pulling at the vines. They were tough, resistant. I had to use my knife to cut through them. Her eyes snapped open as soon as I freed her arms. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't," she gasped. "Don't cut any more trees. It makes them angry." "Patricia, what happened? Where's the rest of your team?" "Gone. Taken. The forest." "Jonathan, the forest is times alive, *, really alive. It's been talking to me." I pulled her to her feet. She was shaking, her clothes soaked through from the rain. "We need to get you out of here. Can you walk? You don't understand." She looked at me with wild eyes. "It's not just alive, it's intelligent. It's old, Jonathan. Older than anything. It remembers." "Remembers what?" "Everything. The logging camp in the 1,880 seconds. The men who tried to cut it down. It remembers how they screamed." A chill ran down my spine. I'd read about that logging camp. 32 men had disappeared overnight. The official report said they'd been killed by a landslide, but the bodies were never found. "Patricia, you're in shock. We need to." The ground shook, not like an earthquake, like something underneath was moving. I looked down and saw the roots shifting, sliding over each other like snakes. The braided pattern was changing, rearranging itself. "It knows. You're here," Patricia whispered. "It knows what you used to do." "What I used to do?" "You were a logger. You cut down trees. It can smell it on you. It can feel it in your hands." The trees around us began to lean. Slowly, impossibly, they were bending toward us, branches reaching down like fingers. I grabbed Patricia's arm. "Run. Now." We ran. The forest came alive around us. Branches whipped at our faces. Roots erupted from the ground, trying to trip us. The whispering grew louder, angrier, forming almost words that I couldn't quite understand. I pulled out my radio as we ran. "Eddie. Eddie, come in." Static then. "Jonathan, what's happening?" "Get the plane ready. We're coming in hot. What about the others?" I looked back. Through the trees, I could see the grove. The big spruce was moving now, really moving. Its branches were spreading wider, reaching out. And wrapped around those branches, suspended 30 feet in the air, were 3 bodies. The rest of Patricia's team. They weren't moving. "They're gone, Eddie. Just get ready to fly." We burst out of the tree line and ran for the lake. Behind us, I could hear trees falling, the enormous crash of wood hitting earth. But when I glanced back, I saw they weren't falling randomly. They were falling in a pattern, creating a barrier, trying to cut us off from the water. The float plane was where we'd left it, rocking gently in the rain-swept lake. Eddie was already in the cockpit, the engine running. We splashed into the water and swam for the plane. Patricia was struggling, her strength giving out. I grabbed her and pulled her along. We were 10 feet from the plane when something wrapped around my ankle. A root, thick as my arm, covered in moss. It had somehow extended from the shore into the water. It pulled tight, dragging me backward. "Jonathan!" Eddie was leaning out of the plane, reaching for us. I kicked hard with my free leg, trying to break free, but the root only tightened. More roots were sliding into the water now, moving like tentacles. One wrapped around Patricia's waist. I still had my knife. I pulled it out and started sawing at the root around my ankle. The blade bit into the wood, and immediately that smell hit me again, thick, cloying, like blood and sap mixed together. The root loosened slightly, just enough for me to pull free. I grabbed Patricia and half swam, half dragged her to the plane. Eddie pulled her in, then reached for me. That's when the trees at the shore began to fall, not away from us, toward us. 3 massive Sitka spruce, each over 100 feet tall, toppling forward in perfect synchronization. If they hit the water where we were, the waves alone would swamp the plane. "Go!" I screamed at Eddie. "Go now!" Eddie didn't hesitate. The engine roared, and the plane started moving. Slowly at first, too slowly. I was hanging onto the float, my legs still in the water, watching those enormous trees fall toward us. The first tree hit the water 50 feet behind us with a crash like thunder. The wave lifted the plane, nearly flipping us. Eddie fought the controls, increasing speed, trying to get us airborne. The second tree fell closer, 30 feet. The wave was bigger this time, and I lost my grip on the float. I went under, the cold water shocking my system. When I surfaced, the plane was 10 feet away and moving fast. I swam harder than I've ever swum in my life. Eddie had slowed the plane as much as he dared. Patricia was leaning out, her hand stretched toward me. I reached up and our fingers touched, then locked. She pulled, Eddie kept the plane steady, and somehow I got myself up onto the float and through the door. The third tree fell as we lifted off. It hit exactly where we'd been seconds before, its branches reaching up as if trying to grab us from the air. We climbed fast, banking away from the island. I looked down and saw something that will haunt me forever. The entire grove was moving, hundreds of trees, all bending, all reaching toward us. And in the center, that enormous spruce stood taller than all the others, its branches spread wide like arms. For just a moment, I swear I could see a face in its trunk. An old face, ancient and angry and patient. Then the fog rolled in and swallowed everything. We didn't speak during the flight back to Juneau. Patricia sat in the back, staring at nothing, occasionally muttering to herself. Eddie kept checking the instruments like he didn't trust them. I couldn't stop shaking. When we landed, there were already people waiting. Word had gotten out that a survey team was missing. Park Service officials, local police, a couple of Coast Guard guys. I gave my report. I told them what I'd seen, trying to make it sound rational. Equipment malfunction, possible bear attack. 3 bodies that would need to be recovered. I didn't mention the trees, moving. I didn't mention the roots that grabbed us. I didn't mention the face. Patricia wasn't as careful. She told them everything, the intelligent forest, the trees that communicated, the ancient consciousness that had killed her team. They nodded politely and had a doctor sedate her. Eddie and I didn't correct her. We didn't back her up. We just stayed quiet and let them think she was in shock. But that night, in the hotel bar, Eddie leaned close and whispered, "It was real, wasn't it? What we saw." "Yeah," I said, "it was real." "What are we going to do?" "Nothing. Who would believe us?" Eddie took a long drink. "They're going to send a recovery team out there." I'd been thinking the same thing. "I know. We have to warn them." "Warn them about what? That the trees are alive and angry? They'll think we're crazy. So we just let them go?" I didn't have an answer for that. The recovery team went out 2 days later. 6 men, all experienced in wilderness recovery. They had helicopters, cutting equipment, the works. They were going to retrieve the bodies and investigate the destroyed camp. They never came back. The helicopter returned to Juneau with a panicked crew who reported that their landing zone had been compromised. Trees had fallen across it while they were in the air, making it impossible to land. When they'd tried to find an alternate spot, every clearing they approached became blocked within minutes. The pilot said it looked like the forest was defending itself. A second team was sent, then a third. Each time, the same thing happened. The forest wouldn't let them in. After 2 weeks, the official word came down from the Park Service. The area was being designated as environmentally critical habitat. All logging permits for that section of Admiralty Island were denied. The grove would be left completely alone. I knew what that really meant. Someone higher up understood what was happening. Someone had made the decision that some places were better left untouched. Patricia was released from the hospital after a week. She quit the Forest Service and moved to Oregon. Last I heard, she teaches botany at a community college and refuses to go hiking. Eddie kept flying, but he never went back to that side of the island. Give that grove a wide berth, he'd tell other pilots. Trust me on this. As for me, I stayed on as a ranger. But something changed after that day. I started hearing things in the forest that I'd never noticed before. Not words, exactly, more like whispers, feelings. The trees seemed to lean toward me when I walked past, their branches moving in ways that had nothing to do with wind. And I started to understand what Patricia had tried to tell me. The forest times was times conscious, not in the way humans are conscious, but in its own ancient way. It remembered everything, every tree that had been cut down, every forest that had been destroyed, every mountain that had been stripped bare. It was angry, and it was patient. I became a different kind of ranger after that, not just someone who managed the forest, someone who protected it. I found myself standing in the way of logging operations, filing complaints, making noise. Other rangers thought I'd gone radical. Maybe I had. But I'd seen what happens when you push the forest too far. 3 months after the incident, I got a call from a Tlingit elder named Samuel Whitewater. He'd heard about what happened at the Grove and wanted to talk. We met at his home in Angoon, a small fishing village on the western side of the island. Samuel was in his 80s, his face weathered like driftwood, his eyes sharp and knowing. "You saw it," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. And you survived. That means it let you live." "Why would it do that?" Samuel poured us both coffee. "That grove has been there for over 1,000 years. It was old when my ancestors first came to this island. They called it Times Kate Shah. Times in our language, the knowing forest. Knowing? It knows things, remembers things. My grandfather told me stories passed down for generations. That forest has protected itself many times. The first white men who tried to log it in the 1,880 seconds, they all disappeared. Just like your survey team, just like the recovery crews. The official report said landslide. Samuel smiled sadly. The government always finds official explanations, but the people who live here, we know the truth. That forest is alive in a way most people don't understand. It's connected every tree, every root, every bit of fungus in the soil. All one organism, thinking, remembering. That's impossible, is it? You saw it move, you felt it pull you down, you heard it whisper. What's impossible about that? I didn't have an answer. Samuel leaned forward. The forest let you live because it recognized something in you. You used to cut down trees, yes, but you stopped, you changed, it could feel that change. You're saying it forgave me? No. It decided you weren't a threat anymore. There's a difference. He paused, sipping his coffee. But it's watching you, Jonathan, always watching. If you ever pick up a chainsaw again, if you ever mark another tree for cutting, he didn't need to finish. I understood. What about the others? Patricia's team? Eddie? The 3 surveyors were killed because they came to destroy. The forest felt their intention. As for your pilot friend, Samuel's expression darkened. He's in danger. What? Why? Because he helped you escape. The forest doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive. I was on my feet. I need to warn him. It may already be too late. I drove to Juneau at 90 miles an hour. Eddie lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by, I realized, with growing horror trees. Tall pines and spruce that he'd probably thought were beautiful, peaceful. His truck was in the driveway. The front door was open. Eddie, I ran inside. The cabin was empty, but there were signs of struggle. A chair knocked over, his radio on the floor, still turned on, broadcasting static. I ran back outside and stopped cold. The trees around his cabin had moved. I'd been there dozens of times before, and I knew their positions. They'd been at least 20 feet from the house on all sides. Now they pressed right up against it, their branches covering the windows, their roots buckling the foundation. And they were still moving. Eddie. I screamed his name, running around the cabin. Where are you? A sound came from above. I looked up. Eddie was in the trees. 30 feet up, wrapped in branches that held him suspended like the survey team had been held. But unlike them, he was still alive. His eyes were open, staring down at me. Jonathan, he whispered. His voice was barely audible. I can hear them. They're talking to me. Hold on, I'll get you down. I looked around frantically for something, anything, a ladder, climbing equipment. But even as I searched, I knew it was useless. The trees wouldn't let me reach him. Don't, Eddie said. It's too late. They've already decided. Decided what? That I'm guilty, that I helped destroy them. All those flights over the forest, all those logging crews I carried. They remember every tree that was cut down because of me. That wasn't your fault. You were just doing your job. Eddie smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. Tell my grandmother I'm sorry. Tell her she was right about the trees being awake. The branches tightened. Eddie? No. A massive cedar, I don't know where it came from. Maybe it had always been there and I just hadn't seen it, began to lean. Slowly, deliberately, it fell toward Eddie's suspended body. I ran forward, knowing I couldn't reach him, couldn't save him, but unable to just stand there and watch. The cedar fell with a terrible, final crash. When the branches settled, Eddie was gone. Not killed in a way I could see or understand. Just gone. Absorbed into the tree itself, pulled into the wood like he'd never existed. I stood there for a long time, my hands shaking, my mind refusing to accept what I'd just witnessed. The trees around the cabin were still now, peaceful again. As if nothing had happened, but on the trunk of the cedar, where Eddie had been, a new knot had formed. And in that knot, if you looked closely, you could see the outline of a face. Eddie's face, screaming. I didn't file a report about Eddie's disappearance. What would I say? That the trees killed him? That that they pulled him into their trunks like some kind of horror movie? No one would believe me. They'd do to me what they did to Patricia, sedate me, put me on leave, tell everyone I'd had a breakdown. So I said, Eddie had gone, flying and never came back. Common enough in Alaska, where weather can turn deadly in minutes and planes sometimes just vanish into the wilderness. They searched for 3 weeks and found nothing. Eventually, they stopped looking. His grandmother knew the truth. I told her everything, sitting in her small kitchen while she made tea. She didn't seem surprised. The forest takes what it's owed, she said quietly. Eddie knew the risk. We all do, those of us who've lived here long enough. You don't take from the forest without giving something back. He didn't deserve to die. Maybe not, but the forest is older than deserving, older than fair. It simply is. I left her house that day, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt. Eddie had been my friend. Patricia was gone. The survey team was dead. I was the only one left who'd seen the truth and survived. For a while, I thought about quitting, moving somewhere far from forests, somewhere safe. But I realized there was no safe place. Forests are everywhere. Old growth or new growth, managed or wild, they're all connected somehow. And now that I'd seen the truth, I couldn't unsee it, so I stayed. But I changed. I became the ranger no one likes, the one who blocks every logging permit, the one who fights against every development project that threatens old-growth forest. Other rangers think I'm extreme. The logging companies have filed complaints about me. My supervisor has suggested I might be better suited to a different position. But I don't care, because I understand now what I didn't understand before. The forests are watching, they're listening, they're waiting, and they remember. It's been almost 2 years now since that day at the Grove. I still hear the whispers when I walk through the forest. Sometimes I'll put my hand on a tree trunk and feel something, not quite a heartbeat, but a pulse. A consciousness. Ancient and vast, flowing through the wood. The old growth groves across Alaska have become places no one wants to log anymore. Oh, they'll give official reasons, environmental concerns, habitat protection, cultural significance. But I've talked to the loggers. They know. Word spreads in small communities. Stories get told. People understand, even if they won't say it out loud. There are some places you don't go. Some trees you don't cut. Last week, I got a call about a new development project, a luxury resort planned for the northern part of the island. They want to clear 20 acres of old-growth forest trees that have been standing for 500 years. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to stand in their way, file every complaint I can, make as much noise as possible. And if they somehow manage to get past all that, if they actually send crews into those trees with chainsaws, well, I won't be the one who has to explain to the families why those crews never came home. I keep a picture of Eddie on my desk. In the photo, he's standing next to his plane, smiling, the forest behind him. I look at it every day and remember what I learned in that grove on Admiralty Island. The forest that hunts doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. It simply waits, patient as stone, old as time, watching with 1,000 eyes made of wood and bark and ancient memory. And it's not just that one grove. They're all connected somehow, every old-growth forest, every ancient tree, a network of consciousness spanning continents, growing older and wiser with each passing year. We think we own the land. We think we can take what we want, cut down what we choose, shape nature to our will. But the trees know different. They know that we're just visitors in a world that was theirs long before we arrived. And they're willing to wait, season after season, year after year, until the day we finally understand that some debts must be paid. I think about that a lot when I'm alone in the forest. I put my hand on the bark of a spruce tree, one that might have been alive when Columbus sailed to America, and I feel that pulse, that ancient consciousness. I'm sorry, I whisper, for what I did, for what we've all done. And sometimes, when the wind is still and the forest is quiet, I swear I hear an answer, not words, exactly, but a feeling, an understanding. The forest knows I'm trying to make things right. It knows I've changed, but it's still watching, always watching. My name is Rebecca Tidecaller, and I've been a park ranger at Kenai Fjords for 12 years. Before that, I was a Navy diver. I know the ocean. I know what lives in it, what moves through it, what dies in it. I've pulled bodies from the water. I've rescued seals tangled in fishing line. I've dove deeper than most people will ever go. I never believed in Kalupalik. My grandmother told me stories when I was little about creatures that lived in the deep water, human-like things with gills and webbed hands that pulled people under. I always thought they were just walruses, maybe aggressive leopard seals. The ocean is scary enough without making up monsters. That was before November 1983. Resurrection Bay sits at the edge of Kenai Fjords National Park, surrounded by glaciers that drop ice into water 900 feet deep. The fjord is so cold, your body would shut down in minutes without a dry suit. In November, pack ice starts forming. The days get short. Most of the tour boats stop running. I live in a cabin 20 minutes by boat from the nearest town. My partner Sarah and I keep 2 rescue dogs and a radio that connects us to the Coast Guard station. The water is our highway. The storms are our weather reports. We know this place. On November 3rd, I got a call at 4 in the morning. Rebecca, this is Coast Guard Seward. We need you on the water. Fishing vessel Times Northern Catch Times reported 2 crew members missing. Captain says they were pulled underwater. I sat up, already reaching for my clothes. Pulled underwater? What does that mean? Captain's not making much sense, says something grabbed them. We're sending a boat, but you know these waters better than anyone. I did. I'd been diving these fjords since I was 23. I knew every current, every drop-off, every place where the bottom suddenly disappeared into black nothing. I'll be there in 40 minutes, I said. Sarah was already up, putting on coffee. She's a Marine. Biologist. Studies whale communication. She gave me that look, the one that says, times be careful, times without words. Just a recovery dive, I told her. Probably fell overboard in rough seas. But my stomach felt tight. Something about the Coast Guard operator's voice. The way he said, Captain's not making much sense. The water was flat calm when I launched my boat. That was the first strange thing. November in Alaska means storms. But the bay looked like dark glass, not a ripple. The kind of stillness that makes you nervous. I found the Times Northern Catch Times anchored 3 miles out, right over one of the deepest parts of the bay. The Coast Guard cutter was already there, lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Captain Mike Seaworthy stood on deck, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His hands shook when he lit a cigarette. They were pulling in nets, he said. Jenny and Carlos. Good crew. Been fishing with me for 5 years. What happened? I asked, pulling on my dry suit. Something cut the nets, clean cuts, like scissors. Jenny went to check them and Carlos went to help her. I heard her scream. When I got there, Carlos was leaning over the rail, and then something pulled him. Fast. He didn't even have time to grab anything, just gone. Did you see what it was? His eyes met mine. I saw a hand, a big hand with webbed fingers. That's crazy, right? The cold, the dark. I was seeing things. I wanted to agree with him. Tell him yes, it was the cold and dark. But my grandmother's voice was in my head. Asterisk. The Kalupalik live in the deepest waters. They don't like boats. They don't like nets. Asterisk, show me where, I said. The nets were still in the water, what was left of them. I leaned over the rail with a flashlight. The cuts were clean. Too clean. Not torn like a propeller would do, not chewed like a shark, cut in straight lines. That's not normal, Tom Deepcurrent said. He was the Coast Guard dive master, my backup for the search. Good guy, former commercial diver. What makes cuts like that? I don't know, I said, but I was lying. I knew the stories. Kalupalik had claws like knives. We dove at first light. The water in Resurrection Bay is never clear, but that morning it felt darker than usual. My dive light barely cut 10 feet. Tom stayed close to me as we descended along the anchor chain. At 60 feet, I saw the first net. It hung in the water like a ghost, swaying in a current that shouldn't exist. We were in a dead zone, protected by the bay. There shouldn't be any current. I signaled Tom, and we swam closer. The net had been cut in a pattern, geometric, deliberate, not random. Someone or something had carefully sliced it into sections. My radio crackled. Rebecca, you seeing this? Yeah, I said. This wasn't an accident. We kept descending. At 200 feet, I saw movement below us. Something big, moving fast. Too fast for a seal. Too big for a fish. Tom, did you? I saw it, he said. His voice was tight. We were at the edge of our safe depth, much deeper, and we'd need to decompress on the way up. But I could see something on the bottom now, caught in the ship's spotlight from above. Metal. Equipment. That's a dive tank, Tom said. Carlos's tank. We dropped to 300 feet. The pressure made my ears ache even through the equalization. The tank lay on a rock ledge, the regulator still attached. No body. That's when I saw the scratches on the rock face. Long gouges, 4 parallel lines, like claw marks, but bigger than any bear. And they went down, straight down into a crack in the rock that disappeared into darkness. We need to go back up, I said. Agreed, Tom said, but he was looking at something past me. His eyes were wide behind his mask. I turned. It was there, about 50 feet away, watching us. My brain tried to make it something normal. A seal, I thought, just a big seal. But seals don't have hands. It was 8 feet long, maybe more. The body was human-like but covered in scales that caught my dive light and reflected it back green. The face was almost human, nose, eyes, mouth, but the eyes were too big and completely black. Gills opened and closed on its neck. Its hands ended in webbed fingers with claws at least 3 inches long. It tilted its head, studying us. Then it opened its mouth. I saw rows of teeth, sharp and pointed, like a shark's. Rebecca, Tom whispered. Rebecca, what is that? Go, I said. Go now. We started ascending, following protocol, keeping our speed controlled even though everything in me wanted to bolt for the surface. You can't rush from 300 feet. The pressure change will kill you faster than any creature. I looked down once. It was following us, staying just at the edge of my light. Not attacking, just watching. Waiting. At 100 feet, it disappeared. We broke the surface, and the Coast Guard crew pulled us up. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the ladder. Did you find them? Captain Mike asked. Found Carlos's tank, Tom said. He looked at me. Did that really just happen? I don't know what we saw. I lied. But I did know. My grandmother's stories weren't stories. The Kalupalik were real. That afternoon, 3 more fishing boats reported crew missing, all of them in deep water, all of them describing the same thing: webbed hands, something pulling them down, too strong to fight. The Coast Guard shut down fishing in the bay. They called it a safety precaution. Equipment failure, they said, unusual currents. But I knew better. Tom and I met that evening at the Coast Guard station. We spread out depth charts on the table. Look, he said, pointing. All the disappearances are in the deepest parts of the bay. 600 feet or more. There's a pattern, I said. They're protecting something. Protecting what? I traced a line on the chart. There's a canyon system down there. My grandmother told me about it. The Aleut people used to leave offerings there. They said it was sacred water. You think that's where they live? I think that's where we're not supposed to go. Tom's radio crackled. All units, we have another situation. Commercial dive boat times Sea Explorer times is not responding to radio calls. Last known position near Ayalik Bay. We looked at each other. That's right over the canyon, I said. The Times Sea Explorer times was a research vessel. 3 crew, all experienced divers. They'd been doing a geological survey of the canyon system. We found the boat at sunset, drifting. No one on board. The engines were still running. Dive equipment was laid out on deck like they'd just been suiting up. But there were claw marks on the hull, deep gouges, 4 parallel lines. Below the waterline. Something came up under the boat, Tom said. Sarah Saltdepth was there, no. Relation to me, different family. She was a commercial dive specialist, had been working on the survey with the Times Sea Explorer times crew. She'd stayed on shore that day because of equipment trouble. They were mapping the canyon, she said. Her voice was shaking. Looking for the old submarine base. What submarine base? I asked. From the 50s. The military had an underwater research facility down there. It was classified. They sealed it up in 1957 and told everyone to stay away. My skin went cold. What were they researching? No one knows. The records are still classified. But the local Aleut elders wouldn't go near that part of the bay for years after. They said the Navy woke something up. Tom was checking the ship's dive logs. According to this, they went down yesterday, got footage at 800 feet. Then the cameras cut out. "I need to see that footage," I said. We watched it on the boat's monitor. The first 20 minutes were normal rock formations, the usual deep-water fish. Then the divers found something, a structure, made of stone, but not natural, carved. The camera moved closer, and I could see markings on the walls, symbols I didn't recognize. Then something moved in the darkness behind the structure. The camera swung around, and for just a second, I saw it clearly. Not one kalupalik, a group of them, 6, maybe 7. They were watching the divers from inside the structure. The footage went black. "They saw us," Sarah whispered. "They knew we found their home." That night, Tom volunteered to do another dive. "Just a quick look," he said. "See if we could find any sign of the missing divers." I should have said no. Should have told him it was too dangerous. But we needed to know what we were dealing with. We went down at midnight. The water was even darker than before. My dive light seemed dimmer, like something was absorbing the light. At 400 feet, Tom's voice came over the radio. "Rebecca, I'm seeing structures, multiple buildings. This is incredible." "Tom, come back up. We need to. There's writing on the walls. Some kind of—" "Wait. Rebecca, there's something moving. Tom, get out of there, now." "It's not attacking. It's just watching. It looks almost curious." "Tom," his scream cut through the radio. Then silence. I dove after him, pushing past safe limits. Found him at 500 feet, unconscious. There were marks on his arms, bite marks, but precise, almost surgical, like something had been careful not to kill him. Getting him to the surface nearly killed us both. He needed immediate decompression. We spent 3 hours in the chamber while he drifted in and out of consciousness. When he finally woke up, his eyes had changed. They looked distant, like he was seeing something far away. "They showed me," he whispered. "The city. It's thousands of years old, older than humans. They've been here forever, Rebecca. We're in their home. What did they want? They want us to leave. But they know we won't. They know humans never leave." He grabbed my arm, his grip was weak. "They're going to make us leave." The next morning, every fishing boat in the harbor had the same marks. 4 parallel claw gouges below the waterline. A warning. The harbor master tried to keep it quiet, but word spread fast. Crews started refusing to go out. The Coast Guard called in a helicopter to do aerial searches. That's when Sarah decided to go down herself. "We need proof," she said. "Real documentation. Otherwise they'll say we're crazy." "Sarah, don't," I begged. "You saw what happened to Tom. Tom is alive. They let him live. Maybe they'll let me film them. Maybe we can communicate." She went down the next afternoon with a full camera rig. I watched from the surface, tracking her depth. 400 feet, 500, 600. Her voice came over the radio. "I see them. Oh God, there's dozens. They're beautiful. Like nothing I've ever." The radio went dead. We sent down remote cameras, found her gear at 700 feet. The camera housing was crushed. The footage was gone. We never found Sarah's body. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw webbed hands reaching up from dark water. I heard my grandmother's voice. Asterisk. The Kalupalik guard the deep places. They remember when the ocean was theirs alone. Asterisk. At 2 in the morning, I got in my boat, took my dive gear, my lights, and headed for the canyon. I know it was stupid, reckless. But Sarah was dead. 3 other divers were dead. Tom was traumatized. And I was the only one who understood what we were dealing with. I'm Aleut. My grandmother taught me the old ways. The blessings. The songs. Maybe that would be enough. I anchored over the deepest part of the canyon and suited up. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. If this went wrong, I didn't want anyone else coming after me. The descent felt different this time. Purposeful. Like I was being allowed down instead of sneaking. At 300 feet, they appeared. All of them. I counted 12 kalupalik surrounding me in a circle. The largest one, the female, with bioluminescent markings that glowed blue in the darkness, swam closer. She was 9 feet long. Her eyes were completely black, but intelligent. More intelligent than any animal's eyes. She looked at me like she was reading my thoughts. I did the only thing I could think of. I sang. It was the old Aleut song my grandmother taught me. A blessing for safe passage over water. An acknowledgement that the ocean owns everything, and we are just visitors. The Kalupalik stopped moving. They listened. When I finished, the female reached out one webbed hand, touched my mask gently. Then she gestured down, into the darkness below. She wanted me to see. I followed her down, past 600 feet, 700. My depth gauge was screaming warnings. I was way beyond safe limits. The structures came into view, not buildings, a city, carved from the rock itself, ancient beyond measure. Symbols covered every surface. And in the center, something that made my blood run cold. Human equipment. Military equipment. The old submarine base, but not sealed. Opened. And inside, evidence of experiments. Tanks that had held Kalupalik, dissection tables, research notes sealed in waterproof containers. The Navy hadn't been protecting the Kalupalik. They'd been studying them, trying to weaponize them. The female Kalupalik pointed at the equipment, then at me. Her meaning was clear. Asterisk. Your kind did this. Your kind hurt us. Asterisk. Then she showed me deeper into the city. To a chamber where young Kalupalik swam with their parents. A nursery. A home. And I understood. They weren't monsters. They were protecting their families. Their sacred places. From people like us who took, who saw everything as something to be used or studied or destroyed. Sarah hadn't been killed out of malice. She'd been killed because she represented everything the Kalupalik feared. More humans, more cameras, more intrusion. They were fighting for survival. The female Kalupalik made a gesture, spreading her arms wide, then pulling them close. Universal. Asterisk. This is ours. Stay away. Asterisk. I nodded. Then I did something my training told me never to do. I took off my mask. For 30 seconds, I couldn't breathe. The water was so cold it felt like knives. My lungs screamed. But I wanted her to see my face, see that I understood, see that I was sorry. She studied me. Then she gently pushed my mask back onto my face, helped me seal it. Saved my life when she could have let me drown. When I surfaced an hour later, barely making it through decompression without dying, I knew what I had to do. The Coast Guard officially ruled the deaths as equipment failures and strong currents. The canyon area was designated as a marine sanctuary. No diving, no fishing, no research. The old submarine base was officially sealed with tons of concrete. Tom recovered, but he transferred to a station in California. Said he couldn't look at the ocean the same way anymore. He dreams about the underwater city, he told me. Dreams about the Kalupalik singing in languages older than human words. I still work at Kenai Fjords. Still lead the Marine Mammal Rescue Program. But I don't dive in the deep parts of the bay anymore. And I make sure everyone who visits understands the rules. Stay out of the canyon system. Respect the deep water. Don't disturb what lives there. Most people think I'm being overcautious. They don't know what I know. They didn't see what I saw. But sometimes, on very quiet mornings when the water is perfectly still, I hear singing. Not whale song, something else. Something that sounds almost human but not quite. And I know they're still down. There, watching. Waiting to see if we'll keep our promise. I visit my grandmother's grave every month now. Tell her she was right about the Kalupalik. Tell her I'm sorry I didn't believe. She left me one more story I never understood until now. She said the Kalupalik are older than the glaciers, that they were here when the first humans crossed the ice bridge from Asia, that they remember a time when the ocean was all there was. And she said they're patient. They know the ice is melting. They know the seas are rising. They know that one day, the ocean will take back what was always theirs. I believe her now. Every night, I dream of dark water, of webbed hands reaching up, of cities carved in stone beneath the waves. And I hear the female Kalupalik's voice in my head, even though she never spoke. We are the guardians, we remember, and we are waiting. Last week, a research team from California requested permits to study the unique marine geology of Resurrection Bay. I denied the request. When they pushed back, I sent them the classified military reports from the 1,950 seconds. The ones that showed what happened to the Navy divers who went too deep, who disturbed what shouldn't be disturbed. They withdrew their request. The commercial fishing boats still avoid the deep parts of the bay. Captain Mike sold the Times Northern Catch Times and moved inland. He tells people he's done with the ocean. I understand. Some of us aren't meant to know what lives in the deepest waters. Some secrets are better left alone. But I'm Aleut. This is my home. These are my waters. And I've made a promise to the guardians who live below. As long as I'm here, as long as I have breath, I'll make sure humans stay away from the places we don't belong. Because I've seen what happens when we don't, and because I know, deep in my bones, that the Kalupalik are not the monsters in this story. We are. The ocean is patient. The ocean remembers. And the ocean, always, takes back what's hers. Remember that. The next time you look at deep water. The next time you wonder what lives in the darkness below. Some depths aren't meant to be explored. Some things in the ocean are better left alone. Trust me on this. My name is Rebecca Tidecaller, and I know the truth about the deep waters of Alaska. I just hope I'm gone before the Kalupalik decide we've broken our promise.